Welcome to the Dork Forest. Jackie and her pals will never bore us. Shameless confessions
about our obsession
will make us laugh and smile. So let's explore the Dork Forest and dork out for a while.
Hello and welcome to the Dork Forest. Here's the intro. I'm Jackie Kashian, your host. You know the websites, JackieKashian.com, dorkforest.com, thedorkforest.com, familypetancestry.com. And the show is available on iTunes and dorkforest.com. It is also available on probably Stitcher and SoundCloud and allthingscomedy.com. It's around, is what I'm saying. I'm so glad you found it. And, let's do the credits. Mike Rickbert composed and sang that song you just heard, sang it with his wife, Sarah, and he will sing again at the end of the show his words to the Mexican hat dance. Patrick Brady's going to fix this audio, and Vilmos does the website. I turned into a radio voice there for a second. Well, let's talk about the websites. JackieKashian.com has the donation button. It's January of 2017. You may now donate again. Feel free. Knock yourselves out. The Dork Forest is always free. There are premium episodes that are $2 a pop, but every week there's a free episode. And if you like the show, you can throw some money at the donation button. I would appreciate it, and I will use it wisely on cashews and chocolate and audio wires and rent. God knows what I'll use it for. But if you want to donate, do that. If you want to just talk up the show, you can do that. That's another way to support the show. You can also use the Amazon banner, which is at JackieKashian.com. There's a tiny Amazon icon on the main page, and then there's under the support the show tab, there's the donation button, but there's also an Amazon banner. And all that banner does is take you through to Amazon. You order like normal, and the Dork Forest gets a little bit of a kickback. That's a way to support the show if you shop at Amazon. Another way to support the show, if you like the show, is to get a t-shirt. You can get a t-shirt of the Dork Forest, Ranger of the Dork Forest, or just a regular Dork Forest t-shirt. You can also get any of my stand-up CDs. You can get my stand-up DVD. You can get any of my stand-up t-shirts. The Spooky Reading Girl is the only one that I'm doing right now. And all the t-shirts are union made here in the United States of America because, as I like to say, I'm willing to wear clothing made by toddlers. I'm unwilling to sell clothing made by toddlers. So they run a little big. They're Bayside. So if you go to the Bayside website and look at their union t-shirts, that's what you're getting. There might even be a sizing chart. Knock yourself out. Okay, this week in stand-up comedy, I'm opening for Brian Regan in Idaho, 2 days, and then I'm opening for Maria in San Diego on the Saturday. So go to my calendar on JackieKashian.com and figure out what those dates actually are. Knock yourself out. Wow, second time I said that. Other than that, I told you about the premium episodes. There are premium episodes on the dorkforest.bandcamp.com. They're hard to download and then move over to iTunes, I guess. People have been telling me. But Bandcamp has a free app that you can play them all on. And now there's like 10 of them. Plus there's a free album of really old Dork Forests, which are in archive. There's 17 hours of that. Then that's a free album. And then there's a storytelling album at thedorkforest.bandcamp.com. So if you get the Bandcamp app, which is free, you can download them easy peasy to them and just listen to whatever you want. But do whatever you want. Let's listen to a dork out. This one is a very special episode of the Dork Forest. Hey, I'm in my hotel room here in Minneapolis with my big brother, Phil. Hi, Phil Kashian. Welcome to the program.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to my 15 minutes of fame.
It's going to be one whole hour. You gave me Harriet the Spy when I was 9 years old.
Well, wasn't that special?
It was special. It was. I think you also gave me My Side of the Mountain. I think you gave me a lot of books that were kind of game changers.
I don't like to give books to people that are incidental.
Oh, interesting.
I give a lot. You know, we just went through Christmas and Hanukkah,
right, with the kids.
And I gave the kids. Speaking of My Side of the Mountain, I gave that book to Judah.
Right, Darla's youngest.
I gave Noah a copy of The Hobbit.
Darla's oldest.
And I gave my granddaughter Layla the first book of the Harry Potter series.
And now, how old is Layla? I thought Layla was like 7.
She's 9.
Is she 9?
No, she's 8.
8? Okay.
Not sure she'll be reading it anytime soon, but
right.
But I think Maya could read it to her.
Sure.
And in fact, Layla was over yesterday, and I finally found somebody who will watch Once Upon a Time with me.
Layla?
An 8-year-old.
I think, first of all, Layla will watch a test pattern if the colors change often enough, which is something you used to say about me.
People scoff at me about Once Upon a Time.
Once Upon a Time is a hit.
They all want a happy ending. That's the great thing about Once Upon a Time, and it's a great thing about the kind of fantasy and science fiction I like.
Is when there is a happy ending.
I like that segue.
That's a good one. We're going to get right into it.
Right.
It's so when did you read The Hobbit?
I read The Hobbit in 7th grade.
Okay, you were 12.
I was 12 or 13. I found a copy of The Hobbit in the library at the South Milwaukee Community Youth Center.
So not the South Milwaukee Library and not the library.
No, by
at the
that
junior
time,
high.
I, like you, had been banned from the South Milwaukee Library. I was considered nefarious at best.
you were persona non grata at the South Milwaukee Library. What about so where was the community center? I don't even know where that is.
The community center was the old YMCA building.
Oh, the
which
one
became
on Milwaukee
the
Avenue?
stained glass window store.
Right, they had a crabapple tree in the back of it that I used to climb.
Yes, they did.
Okay.
Back there, Scott Kashian was once clobbered by Bernie Sapinski, Officer Bernie Sapinski back there. But at one time, there was a youth center there.
Okay.
Which had a black light room.
For what?
Where you'd go in the black light room and there'd be posters up,
when you could see groovy things?
There was a lot of groovy going on back then in the early 70s.
That crabapple climbing, it's so weird. Our childhoods are so different because that crabapple climbing was clearly happening in the Appalachians in 1933, where your groovy times were clearly happening in 1969 in San Francisco.
It was way too young, but nonetheless, that's when the groovy time was happening.
And so you found The Hobbit at the
I
community?
found The Hobbit on the bookshelf and grabbed it.
And absconded with it?
And was there to be taken.
There you go.
It was
a legal moment in Phil Kashian's life.
It was. There was no petty crime at all.
All right.
And I was completely blown away by it. And it's interesting because there had been other books that predated that book. I think that made me ripe for The Hobbit. One book in particular I remember reading in 5th grade was The Forgotten Door.
Oh, weird.
I don't know if you remember that book. It was written by Alexander Key.
Okay.
And it was a great story about a little boy who falls through a door from another planet and ends up in like Arizona or New Mexico, and a family adopts him, and they find out he can read minds, and then, of course, the bad guys try to get him.
Sure.
And there's reconciliation at the end.
All right.
He's vegetarian. They don't eat animals. And
okay.
And it was
And it kind of primed you to...
It piqued my interest for science fiction and speculative fiction in general. And then when I was in junior high, because I didn't go to gym class, I hated going to gym class, I would skip gym.
Okay.
And go to the library.
Okay.
And lay low.
Lay low?
Hopefully,
unbeknownst to the gym teacher who
wanted nothing more than to pick on a chubby, long-haired hippie boy.
Right.
And plus, if the truth be told, for the thousands of people listening to this, I was a little intimidated with the whole intimacy of gym class and
the showering?
Bathing in public was not something that appealed to me.
Right. Even though you have 3 brothers.
Right. One of whom, we'll leave that alone.
Well, there was, one of the blessed things of our childhood, or of mine at the very least, was the lack of nudity and the lack of any sort of sexual talk when I was a kid.
Oh, and I was so uncomfortable as
your own person,
like many 13-year-old boys are. But so I'd go to the library, and I remember the first science fiction book I ever read was a book called Time Traders.
Time Traders?
By Andre Norton.
Okay.
Who was, I believe Andre Norton is a woman, but I'm not sure. So anyway, when I found The Hobbit, I just immediately gravitated to it. I mean, to the point to where I can, Bilbo's little song that he sings, the road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began, now far ahead the road must go, and I must travel if I can, pursuing it with eager feet until it joins some larger way.
Yes.
And whither then I cannot say. And
we have an hour.
I'd like to emphasize that I did not bring notes.
You did not bring notes?
So anyway, that was the beginning of my my almost 50-year infatuation with Tolkien.
Yeah.
And obviously went from there to Fellowship of the Ring, and then Two Towers and Return of the King.
Did you read them pretty quickly in succession?
Boom.
Yeah?
Absolutely.
So 7th grade and 8th grade, just full
7th grade.
Just all of 7th grade.
Right.
Lord of the Rings, Hobbit and then Lord of the Rings.
Right.
In a row.
And they were all published. It's interesting back then, too, because, there was a scandal for Tolkien because another publisher published Lord of the Rings unauthorized.
There was an unauthorized publication?
There was an unauthorized publication.
That sounds vaguely familiar, but I don't know who...
Because if you look at the original Ballantine books that came out in the late 60s, early 70s, there's in the front of the book it talks about this is an authorized copy of the book and you should buy this book.
Okay.
And Tolkien was despondent that a publisher, I forget the name of the publisher.
But in the 50s or something?
No, in the 60s.
Oh.
In the 60s.
Somebody just unauthorized, just sort of copied it from something they bought in England?
Right. And they stole it.
Wow. That is a bummer.
It was a stick-up.
Yeah.
And so then I read it, and then I introduced it to others.
Right.
In my very small milieu of friends at the time, Bobby Burrow.
Right, Bobby Burrow. Lois Burrow was my only friend when I was about 6 years old.
Well, and I have to make a confession here.
Mm-hmm.
So I read Lord of the Rings first. Bobby read it. Me and Bobby got so embellished.
Is there going to be a spoiler alert here?
I think everyone by now knows.
Spoiler alert from a book published in 52.
The ultimate spoiler of Lord of the Rings. I told Bobby Burrow.
Yeah.
That when Gandalf went down with the Balrog.
Balrog.
I've always called it a Balrog. But when Gandalf went down.
Yep.
In the Mines of Moria, that he in fact was going to come back to life. And I told him before.
You could not keep it to yourself.
I could not keep it to myself.
Because you were 12, 13 years old.
Oh, yeah. And I was a little stoner boy. And me and Bobby had, one time walking home from junior high, we picked up a stick. And Bobby was very short at the time.
Right.
And so we broke the stick into walking staves.
Yeah.
And I had mine and he had his. And we made a compact at the time.
Yep.
That if one was lost or broken, the other would be lost and broken. And we carried them with us for months.
For months.
And so when
You're still friends with Bobby Burrow.
And don't think Bob Burrow hasn't mentioned.
How many times has he mentioned that you gave out the
more times than I can count. And
you still feel guilty about it.
Well, I do, and it's interesting because it comes around to the movies now. That one of the great disappointments for me was the first time I read Lord of the Rings. The scene in Fangorn Forest where they find Gandalf at the rock where the Ents had met Merry and Pippin,
yeah,
was astounding to me. I mean, I actually was so stunned that Gandalf died. It was almost like the interminably long scenes in the movie of staring into Frodo's eyes. Who was the actor who played Frodo?
It wasn't Sean Astin. It was somebody else. I can't remember his name. Somebody can yell at their iPod.
I'll remember his name. But anyway,
it doesn't matter.
I was devastated that Gandalf had died. I didn't know how they would do it, how they would possibly
be able
make
to
it
win
to the cracks of doom.
Right, without
Gandalf. But as
Gandalf.
it turned out, Gandalf comes back at the right time, I might add.
Right, and I was certain that they were screwed. The first time I read it, I thought it was Saruman.
Oh, yeah, so did I.
I thought that they were dead.
Yeah,
I was like, well, then they're going to get captured, and how are they going to get out of that? and then it turned into Gandalf, and I was, because you did not. I will give you this, Phil Cation. You didn't ruin it for me, because you gave me The Hobbit when I was 19.
Right. And I could have, I learned my lesson.
You learned your lesson.
And to this day, I don't spoil books to people.
Right. Because even if they were written, if doesn't matter what you're reading, you want to ruin Shakespeare for somebody, don't do it.
Well, and the other interesting thing about Tolkien in the late 60s, early 70s was the infatuation that the whole hippie culture gave.
Oh, right.
To Lord of the
embraced.
Rings. Oh, yeah. In fact,
they loved the hair, I think.
And the pipeweed.
Oh, right. And the
pipeweed was a big deal. In fact, Tolkien referred to them as his weird cultists.
He was not wrong.
No, and he would get calls at his house in Oxford.
Because he was in the book.
He was in a book. And, he never really made money off Lord of the Rings until 2 or 3 years before he died.
Oh, really?
And he sold the movie rights early in the 70s for like $100,000.
Yeah.
And he thought he had
taken them for a buggy ride?
snookered those movie people. And then, later with the movies, now the Tolkien estate, led by Christopher Tolkien, sued the studios and eventually got a settlement, an undisclosed amount, for ostensibly
the difference?
No, not the movies. They got spiffed for the ancillary stuff like the video games and the pinball games and and stuff like that. And I'm sure it was a handsome figure.
Right.
And of course the studio said, well, we didn't make money off the movies.
What?
They got Sauron for a bookkeeper.
Yeah, exactly. That's not. I don't believe. Yeah, that's.
And so the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit was a big part of the drug culture, which was a big part of my culture.
Right.
Dropping acid was something. We would drop LSD and go to Grant Park in South Milwaukee
and read aloud.
No, we would talk to hobbits.
Oh, you talk to hobbits. Oh, I'm sorry.
Gandalf.
Sure. You'd play imagination, is what you were doing.
It was the most vivid imagination I ever played. It was a drug that I embraced with a fervor.
Right.
And
with the trails still trailing.
And so it's sort of, and it was funny because I remember in junior high in English class, 7th or 8th grade, I think the teacher asked us around the class what our favorite book was, and I said The Hobbit, and all these other kids started giggling, and the teacher was, probably 26 or something, and knew of The Hobbit from college, and came up and talked to me afterwards. She said, Phil, that's an incredible book.
Yeah.
And then, of course, in high school, in like 10th or 11th grade, I would see people carrying Lord of the Rings as if and it was the first time they'd ever read it.
Right.
With a smugness that could not be rivaled, man. The little fuckers, I saw them. Oh, have you read this? I go, yeah. Yeah, when I was 12.
Right, and hundreds of times since.
And the stoner crowd that I hung out with then, it was interesting. There was a division of affection between the Lord of the Rings and Dune.
Oh, that's where the parting of the ways went?
No, everyone who loved Lord of the Rings, everyone who loved Dune loved Lord of the Rings. I loved Dune.
Right.
It was a much harder book to read than Lord of the Rings, and it was much more, I think, morally ambiguous.
When was Dune written? Was Dune written in the 60s?
In the 60s.
Yeah,
and as we know, it's still being written now. It's a franchise that won't die.
Oh my God. The Lord of the Dork Forest episode about Dune.
Right.
And just finding about that it's actually a political series instead of, and it has nothing, because I read the first 2.5 books. I didn't finish the
Children
third.
of Dune?
I couldn't.
Oh man.
It was a good one, I hear.
Damn good.
That's what Sean Crespos told me.
Well, and it's interesting because Dune with Frank Herbert's son, he kind of championed Dune for his entire career, and I think he's an adequate writer. I mean, I
What
have to
did Frank
admit,
Herbert write? Did he write the first 6 or 9?
at least the first 5, I think.
Okay.
I'm not really sure. I can say that I've read or listened via audio
Right.
to all the Dune books.
And how many are there, do you think? Do you think there's over
at least
10?
7 or 8.
Okay.
And
So it's
there's
no Wheel
closure.
of Time.
There's closure at the end,
Okay.
as opposed to some of, well, I'll go into that later.
Right.
But there's closure. But then, in juxtaposition, you have Christopher Tolkien, who
creates nothing. No.
But
curates.
is a chaperone of the work and does it with such care and dignity that he is a saint in my mind. I mean, we wouldn't have the Silmarillion without Christopher Tolkien. Because, for those listeners out there, the Silmarillion is sort of the prehistory of the Lord of the Rings. And it's a story told by the elves. It's from the elves' point of view. And it starts with a creation myth.
Right.
Because, Tolkien was very religious, in fact, Catholic. And
Catholic in the middle of Church of England country.
Right. And, one of his, there was a club at Oxford where the boys would meet, because, it was the boys.
Right.
And,
there were no girls allowed. It was Women Haters Club.
Him
He-Man
and
Women Haters.
C.S. Lewis and others would meet.
Charles Williams and
right. I don't know who all the other ones were.
Well, that's because you gave me The Hobbit the summer I lived with you and Margaret here in Minneapolis. I read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings that summer, and then I went back to college for my sophomore year.
Oh, and you took a class.
And I took a class that was on. We did not read The Hobbit. It was on the rest of the Inklings, and it was C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, and Charles Williams, and the other guy whose name I'm spacing.
Right.
But they, my professor was like, he wouldn't let us read The Hobbit, and we couldn't read, and Narnia was not assigned, because he said, we're not going to be reading any children's books. So we read The Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion, but we did not read The Hobbit. And then we read Out of the Silent Planet, the Space Trilogy by C.S. Lewis.
I read the first 2 of those.
The last one actually is hard to read, but gets better with every reading.
Yeah, I should give it a shot. I mean, C.S. Lewis is so Protestant that I actually have more tolerance for the Catholic faith, I think, coming out of the Armenian Church.
Right.
And it's interesting because, the quote, falling out between C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, which was bitter,
really,
was over religion.
Oh, really?
C.S. Lewis was proselytizing Tolkien from the Protestant point of view.
Right.
And Tolkien was raised by a Catholic priest.
Okay.
Him and his brother.
Okay.
And Tolkien was a Catholic. And that was a different era where people would have a falling out over intellectual and spiritual things. Mm-hmm. That would end a friendship.
Wow.
They didn't...
and how deep into their relationship? That had to be 20 years into their friendship.
Yeah, it was a long time.
Huh.
And
I didn't know that they didn't remain friends forever.
Oh, no, they had a big falling out. And Tolkien, I think, had 3 children, and Christopher was the one who... Tolkien was writing the Silmarillion up until the day he died.
Yeah.
And it was... it was basically
just notebooks, right?
Notebooks and notes on the backs of envelopes and coffee cans, and it was a labor of love that Christopher put into the Silmarillion, and there's all kinds of there's another book called The Lost Tales of J.R. Tolkien,
right? Which
sort of fills in some of the parts of the Silmarillion. And there's some discrepancies, like Galadriel, and you're welcome to pronounce that name correctly.
Well, right. I'm going to blame all of this on your LSD use when you're 13.
Oh,
Galadriel and your Silmarillion and your Balrog. It's who cares how you pronounce it? You know more about it than I do.
Right. Well, and the fact is, I've always loved Lord of the Rings. I've prided myself on never learning Elvish.
And no tattoos? No tattoos?
No. Elijah Wood. That was the little peckerhead's name.
Speak, friend, and enter.
Oh,
it's you don't want that tattooed on your back? Just the
No, but I understand they did. And bless their hearts. Obviously, the actor who played...
they all got a number 9 on their ankles.
Yeah, and Legolas...
Or somewhere on them. Yeah.
Obviously never read the book.
Orlando Bloom? You don't know that.
Certainly the way he played the character led me to believe it. And then I also wondered if Peter Jackson had read the book.
I know. Here's what... And I have been disagreed with so many times. I would love to be agreed with. And you might agree with me. I've always thought The Lord of the Rings got the world right, but the story wrong. Like, I thought the world looked beautiful. I thought he nailed how Hobbiton looked and how the forest looked and how the feel of the place. But it never felt like the story was about the hobbits. It felt like it was about Aragorn. In the movie, as opposed to the book.
Oh, in the movie. Well...
I thought Peter Jackson...
We can digress to the movie at this point? Is that what we're going to...
No, we don't have to. You could just agree with me and we could go back to books.
No, I didn't think... I didn't think the movie was necessarily about Aragorn. I thought it was an action movie that missed... And I was fine with it being an action movie.
Right.
There were scenes in the action where... The Battle of the Pelennor Fields, where there was at one point Orlando Bloom swings under one of the Oliphants. Almost.
And doesn't he step on top of them, sort of?
Yeah, it reminded me of the walkers from Star Wars.
Oh, yes. It had a little bit of that feel to it.
And it was an abomination, especially that battle scene in Lord of the Rings with Theoden coming down to the field and... Right. And the King of the Nazgûls being killed is my favorite battle scene in all of Lord of the Rings.
It's all of literature.
It's
Eowyn and the king, the Witch King.
Yes,
that is the greatest scene in the books.
I am no man, I am a woman. and there was a look of fear in the Nazgûl's eyes. It was a... And
then was it Merry or Pippin? I can never remember.
I always forget.
Whoever stabbed him in the knee. I was like, stabbing in the knee because they're little.
Right.
He
got up to his knee and did the best he could.
And he did the best he could, and it was the greatest.
Right. It was the greatest battle scene, and then with the madness going on in with Denethor and it was beautiful. And so those books, I mean, that was the era, when it was before the movies, and if you wanted to know them, you had to read them. Yep. And we went on to reading them out loud to the kids, to Emma and Paul, and a little bit to me and Salmon, and it took a long time. It took a year probably to read the whole Lord of the Rings out loud. And I think we read them to Paul, who's the older, and then read them to Emma.
Yep.
And there were no movies. And I don't mind the fact that the movies were made. I think it's fine. I went and saw them.
Sure.
I have some, substantive issues with how some of the characters... In fact, I thought the best movie was Fellowship of the Ring.
Okay.
Especially in the beginning, because I thought Hobbiton and the Shire was depicted really well.
Yes.
Reminded me of Willow.
Willow, use the wand. Use the wand.
Right. And Peck, he's a Peck.
Right. Lord of the Rings, I thought, was just the movie Lord of the Rings, and I've said this before to nobody's entertainment, is that the Lord of the Rings were just a really expensive version of Willow.
Right.
And Willow was such a ripoff of the Lord of the Rings books. But I thought, well done.
I loved Willow, and I understand they're making another, which I'm disappointed.
Well, they don't need to, but
no, they really don't.
Because Willow isn't broken, and Willow's Val Kilmer, and it's all good. It's all done.
But and Rosie Cotton, who eventually becomes
Mrs. Sam Gamgee.
Yeah, very fetching in the movie for a girl with hair on her feet.
Sure. Well, some girls can handle it. Some girls can get hair on their feet and still get the fellas.
Yeah, and a lot of people complained about the movie that Tom Bombadil wasn't in it. Which didn't bother me, because I think a lot of people like to say that they're disappointed that Tom Bombadil wasn't in it, so they could indicate that they knew who Tom Bombadil was.
Right.
It was like, well, I've read the book, so I know.
I have to tell you, probably the first 6 times I read Lord of the Rings, I skimmed the Tom Bombadil section and the poems.
No, I skimmed the poems.
And then,
I skimmed.
But every time
I still skim the poems, except for the one I memorized.
Right. Well, but every time I reread it, I appreciate a different part of it. And one time I read it, and I appreciated Tom Bombadil finally.
Well, what's cool about Tom Bombadil is the fact that the ring has no power over him.
Yes.
And that he predated the Ents, and that he predated, especially when you read the Silmarillion, there's never really any reference from the elves about Tom Bombadil.
Yeah.
And
because the elves are a little self-absorbed.
Right. Oh, the elves. Yeah, they are a little self-absorbed,
Sure.
and they're they had their own magical moments, their own downfalls. Fëanor and the kinslaying with Galadriel.
Galadriel, yes,
yeah, right.
Whatever.
And the
Kate Blanchett.
Kate, yeah, yeah, she was an okay Galadriel. I thought Lothlorien was okay in the movie.
Right.
I thought Rivendell was okay in the movie. The sets.
Mm-hmm. I thought everything was very pretty.
Yeah, and the
I didn't like the giant eye.
Oh, I didn't
to represent
either.
Sauron.
I didn't either.
I was like,
I didn't like the music.
Oh, you didn't like the music?
No,
a little overwhelming.
I thought it was a little over. Here's the thing that gets me back to why I reread Lord of the Rings, why I reread the Silmarillion, even though the Silmarillion is such a tragedy.
It's super sad. There isn't a happy story in the damn thing.
There is not. And, whether it's the Númenóreans and their fall, whether it's the Gondolin, whether it's... There's the Beren and Luthien love
Beren
story.
And Luthien, are you killing me? You're killing me.
Absolutely one of the sweetest love stories in fantasy. And it was astounding. And that what I like about Lord of the Rings and what I like about fantasy and science fiction in general, and especially science fiction written in the 60s and 50s, especially the 60s, is that there's a clear delineation in Lord of the Rings between good and evil. There's an obvious.
It is very black and white.
And there's personal decisions that have to be made in order to, Saruman was an angel, was an Astari, and the same as Gandalf, the same as Radagast, and the other Astari that were sent over to Middle-earth to help in the fight against Sauron. And Saruman made a decision to, quote, go to the dark side, in his lust for the ring and for power. But there still is ultimately a clear delineation in the Lord of the Rings between good and evil, in the same way that a lot of 60s science fiction was an optimistic science fiction, where the presumption from Robert Heinlein and from Isaac Asimov and from Arthur Clarke, Ursula Le Guin, was that the humanity would move on. And
did you ever read Octavia Butler?
I've not read Octavia Butler.
I've only read one, because Andy had a signed copy of one of them. But I think it was also written in like the late 60s, early 70s. I think she did a lot of her.
Been around for a long time. I mean, the prominent woman sci-fi writer in that era that I remember reading a lot of was Ursula Le Guin.
Who's Andy's favorite writer, by the way.
She's
amazingly prolific. I've only read like 3 or 4 of her books.
I've always thought that the closest fantasy in terms of quality was the Earthsea trilogy.
Oh, the Earthsea trilogy, which is 5 books. I have read that.
5 books?
And I've read them all, and I love them.
I love them. I love the first 3 books. I liked the last 2 books.
Sure.
The first 3 books were just...
The first 3 books of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy were great, and the last 2 were not as good.
I'm not a fan.
There was a window then. Then you missed the window.
Yes, I did.
It's Paul Boyer really liked it.
Yeah, I know a lot of people love... I like the BBC
Oh, did you like the
teleplay,
radio?
that radio thing that they did. I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah.
But I never. Same with Terry Pratchett with the
Terry Pratchett with the Discworld.
With the Discworld, I think I read or listened.
Kate Baker told me that it was her favorite author was Terry Pratchett.
Yeah.
So I finally tried to read Terry Pratchett, and it took me 6 of his books for me to go.
It's the same story.
No, but it's not. It's not the same story. It's the same world, and he loves a pun, and he loves a joke, like a very jokey joke.
Right.
And he loves...
Which you hate a jokey joke.
I hate a jokey joke, but because she liked it so much, and Kate Baker, who you also turned me on to, she's my favorite science fiction writer. And at that time, I don't know, still stacks up pretty high up there, but... So I read 6 of them and started to finally get them. And I've currently read probably 11.
Of the Discworld books?
Yeah, of the Discworld books. Yeah, I like them now. I get what he's doing. And they are also very black and white as... No. What am I, nuts? No, they're not black and white as far as good and evil go. But that's what you liked about Arthur Clarke and Heinlein and those guys?
Right. If you look at the science... And, another good example, if you look at the difference, and it goes well into the 6th, I think Gene Roddenberry's world of Star Trek was an optimist. You have the Prime Directive. You have, other than the fact that Kirk was,
sleeping around,
tomcatting around the universe.
Yes.
At least Picard would do it occasionally, but he would think about it beforehand.
Right.
But Picard,
he would have to be convinced. He was more of a shy virgin.
I'd sleep with Picard.
Well, sure. To this day.
Right. But, then I look at the new Star Trek franchise that's come out, and they're action movies.
Yeah, they're action movies.
And
they're not Star Trek movies.
They're adequate. They're
fine
Star
action.
Wars movies.
Yeah,
they're
Star
not even
Wars
as good
movies.
as the original.
Or the last 2.
On this thing I can push.
Like a cough button.
Yeah.
All right, you've got some radio chops. All right.
I've been on talk radio, and
you listen to a lot of talk radio as well.
Not right now. I'm kind of down on it ever since November. Whatever. I've been on a talk radio hiatus.
Good. If you want to stay sane.
I can't listen to those smug SOBs revel in it.
So it's fine.
But
so what did you turn to? Like, because the thing is we share an Audible account, and when I say you have an Audible account, and I leech off of it whenever I need books on tape. So
we want to make sure this is being recorded for quality purposes. Audible.com.
Audible's fine with sharing their accounts. They're cool with
actually.
it. Yeah, and I work for Audible, so go on Audible and find Road Stories with Jackie Kashian. Anyway, small ad. What about there's so many books on tape that and it's mostly newer fantasy, right? Like Brandon Sanderson and...
Well, some of the fantasy that I like now, for instance, the fantasy book I could not finish.
Okay.
What's the one HBO did? Game of Thrones.
Oh, Martin.
The thing about Game of Thrones,
yeah.
The TV series is the production values are unbelievable.
Right.
It's nice to see that HBO will spend money on whatever.
Right.
There's no good guys. I don't see any good guys in Game of Thrones.
There are no good guys in
right.
I've tried to read it. I tried to listen to it when you had it on Audible, and I tried to watch the TV show, and 180 pages. I read the book. The second time I made it to 180 pages of the first book, and I could tell that everybody that I liked was going to be dead.
It's House of Cards of fantasy. They're all evil. And
right.
And any of the good ones, like the family in the beginning, they were the good guys, but they're all dead. The woman who lassos the dragons, very fetching. But she's not, but she's still got issues.
Right.
But the fantasy writers that I like now are Robin Hobb.
Hobb?
Yeah, she's got a whole series on Fitz. Fitz.
How do you spell Fitz?
Fitz.
Okay.
And her world, and that's why, if you talk to and I'm going to digress here, but if you talk to fantasy writers now, one of the things they credit Tolkien with is world building.
Right.
And you hear that term all the time now.
Yeah.
Whether it's in reviews or whatever, they talk about the world building that
Whether
that
it's
occurs
well done
within
or
Brandon
poorly
Sanderson
done.
or whoever. Because Tolkien was the first one to resurrect this world.
Yeah.
Out of Norse mythology, out of his imagination, out of Celtic myths, and create this world that, I mean, I suppose the Arthurian myths, something I could never buy. I could never dig the King Arthur thing. Myths of Avalon?
Yeah.
That book, I just never dug it. But the world building that some of the modern day writers that I like, Brandon Sanderson's.
That Elantris book
as a one-off
haunts
is incredible.
Me. It genuinely, I've never read anything else by him.
And his other, the
Mistborn series.
The Mistborn series
I did read
solid.
that.
His comic book series is really good.
He's got a graphic novel series?
No, I'm a snob about graphic novels, Probably lost a lot of your listeners.
No, just the ones who like graphic novels.
Oh, you can edit that out.
It's I'm going to storm out myself.
But,
what he wrote a book
called
about?
Steelheart. I call them the comic book series.
Yeah, what is
because
that?
they remind me of Marvel comic book heroes, and there's like a planet some sort of power comes to the planet Earth that gives power and madness to characters, and they have power over elemental powers like fire and steel and
so
water.
they have superpowers.
Right, they have superpowers. They're superheroes.
Right.
Many of them are bad guys. In fact, they're all bad guys.
They're all supervillains.
Right, and except for a couple who are struggling against it.
Okay.
And so I like them because there is a juxtaposition once again between. I mean, it's not like I'm Pollyanna to the point where I want everything to be groovy and everything, but I want.
When I read a book, it is to some extent.
Yeah, so that's why the whole, Blade Runner and George Orwell's Brave, and Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. I mean, those
the
books,
ambiguity of.
I mean, there's just like Blade Runner. I mean, I read it with a group of youngsters I know in a book club. The only book we read, and then we disbanded it. Well, we read that in Beowulf. But,
wait, so you tried to read Philip K. Dick when Electric Sheep or whatever the hell it's called?
Yeah, I don't care for, and I know that people love Philip K. Dick, the TV show that's on now, the
Man in the High Castle on Amazon.
the Nazis and the Japanese and I appreciate it intellectually. I just would never, ever watch that show.
On purpose. I can't do it.
I would never do it.
This is quite a Kashian family moment we're having here.
Yeah.
Because I don't... There's... The thing about Philip K. Dick is I think that he writes an incredible story. Like, talk about world building and coming up with possible scenarios. The guy has great fiction chops, right?
Right.
Even Paycheck, which actually might be my favorite Philip K. Dick movie. It's the one with Good Will Hunting, not Matt Damon, Ben Affleck. Mm-hmm. Ben Affleck, during his worst 5 years of acting, Paycheck is the movie.
I've never seen it.
And it is awful yet awesome. If it's on Netflix, it's essentially he takes this paycheck to do something that he knows is evil, but they wipe his memory of it. So he just does it for the money, and then they wipe his memory, and it doesn't matter. And then, oops, there's some sort of trouble, and he remembers. And so it's like, because Philip K. Dick also wrote Total Recall,
right,
and Minority Report, and Blade Runner, and
he's done well.
Well, his supposedly on his deathbed, Philip K. Dick said to his wife, "Make sure to keep up on make sure that you keep renewing the copyright,
right? Because
one day they're going to make movies out of all of this."
Right.
And he was correct.
And he was.
Now, that might be apocryphal, but if he didn't say it, she did keep it up.
Did you ever read Canticle for Leibowitz?
I did in college. It blew my mind.
It's a great book.
It's a great book.
And that's a dystopic book without much hope at the end.
Right.
And so I'm not completely, unwilling to dig that sort of stuff. And I kind of went through the cyberpunk.
Yep.
stretch with William Gibson's.
Yes. Necromancer or Neuromancer?
Which
or,
was
not
brilliant.
Necromancer, Neuromancer?
Neuromancer.
That's it.
It's a brilliant book. And Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash.
Snow Crash. I like Zodiac better.
Yeah.
Remember Zodiac with
I didn't read that one.
It's the one about the pile of garbage in the Boston Harbor. Anyway.
His last book, did you read 70s?
No, you said it was great.
Oh, outstanding.
Okay.
And then
so yeah, there's dystopian stuff. Canticle for Leibowitz, the whole purpose of that book, it had a real, I don't mind if it's a sad book, if the story is something I'm supposed to learn from. And A Canticle for Leibowitz was about how you have to learn from history or it will repeat itself. That's the whole purpose of A Canticle for Leibowitz.
It reminded me of there's a non-science fiction book called Our Man from Havana.
Yeah.
By, what's his name?
I read, I don't remember. What?
I don't remember.
Todd Mason knows. He's out there listening.
Well, it's a book where somebody...
Eat your mic again. Use your mic a little bit better.
Okay, it's a book about where there's a spy in Havana who sends in secret plans that are actually the diagrams of a vacuum cleaner.
Right.
And
right.
And
done? Wait.
No, I'll remember.
Oh, yeah, we'll remember later.
I'll remember.
It's like a spy book or something.
Right.
Yes.
And it's and Canticle for Leibowitz is they discover some obscure documents and they interpret those as some kind of spiritual text. And
right, they make it an illuminated
right. And in fact, it's like
Bible
almost
out of it.
similar to like the diagrams of a vacuum cleaner or something.
Right,
like
there's
that.
like a grocery list involved.
Graham Greene.
And what is it?
It's Graham Greene.
Graham Greene, that's right.
Right.
That's it.
And so the fantasy that I like now is Brandon Sanderson's Patrick Rothfuss.
Patrick Rothfuss. He's going to be on the cruise that I'm going on, the nerd cruise.
Well, why don't you tell him
him
instead of doing a nerd? I mean, you know what? This will alienate many of the Patrick Rothfuss.
It'll only alienate Patrick Rothfuss and his wife. Probably.
Yeah, you know what? Tell him to finish his books. I think
if I run into him in Madison,
the guy's got. He's from Stevens Point.
Right.
Yeah, he's got writer's block, serious writer's block, and so he answers it by doing.
He did a novella,
like a prequel, which I despise the prequel.
Well, especially before the trilogy
Finish
is
the
done.
book first, and then
Name of the Wind,
right.
and then
Wise Men's Fear.
Wise Men's Fear.
They're very good.
Too.
I like them a great deal.
Name of the Wind blew me away. I love Name of the Wind a lot. Wise Men's Fear I didn't finish, sadly, because it felt like Name of the Wind.
Right, and other people said that. The other guy that's really good is a guy named Anthony Ryan.
R-Y-N?
Yes.
Okay.
And I don't remember the name of the series, but it's really, really good. I mentioned Robin Hobb.
Yep. Is the Fitz thing a series?
Yes. Oh, it's a series that won't end.
Oh, it's great.
It's a world that won't end. It's a great and fascinating world, and she's brilliant.
It's
very
a
emotional.
fantastic world?
There's some love stories. There's some...
Action.
There's plenty of action.
But because I like Bujold.
Very...
Did you read that Sharing Knife thing by Lois?
Yes, I like those.
Bujold?
I like her fantasy. I like...
She has new fantasy out this year, I heard.
Yeah.
I didn't read it.
I didn't think I looked at it. I looked at her last Miles book.
That was the last book I read, which was Captain Vorkosigan, right? Wasn't it with the...
Oh, it was about
the cousin.
Miles's dad and mom, and it's a prequel basically about their love affair.
No.
Yes, I'm afraid so.
Wait a minute. But that was Shards of Honor. That was the first one she wrote.
No, there's a new one.
Oh, weird. I blame that on the publishers.
Well, and, the other thing is, it's funny. A lot of people have ripped on authors, sci-fi authors in particular, for, wanting the money, But you got to remember, everyone's got a mortgage,
Right, everyone has bills, and you should get paid for your art.
And in the old days, those sci-fi writers, Heinlein, Asimov, Robert Silverberg, Frederick Poole, Ursula Le Guin, they all wrote tons of short stories because, in a similar way with non-sci-fi or fantasy, there were magazines.
Right.
That would publish them, and they would make money.
Right.
Because that was steady dough. It was no different than F. Scott Fitzgerald and Hemingway and those people writing short stories.
Right, they wrote them by the word, and they made a living off of it.
Right, they had to make a living. And so even like Ursula Le Guin's last two books, the Earthsea books, I kind of felt like she mailed it in a bit and wanted to add to the story because, maybe she needed the dough. Well, and they were nice stories.
Well, who cares? And
who cares is right.
Right, what did, I guess Amy Poehler was on Charlie Rose the other night? I think it was Amy Poehler. And Charlie Rose said, what's your favorite thing about being famous? To Amy Poehler. And Amy Poehler said, I think it's the money. And, which makes sense because she's, I think she's from outside of Chicago. And she goes, no one in my family's ever had any money. And so I've been able to buy these things for my parents and help my siblings and their kids and, do all these things and my friends. I've been able to do things that I've never imagined.
Well, there's a quote from the now much besmirched Bill Cosby. I've been rich and I've been poor, and
right.
Rich is better.
Rich is better.
And the same with writers. I mean, Tolkien... And,
I don't know, besmirched, if I can let that just lie there. He has not been besmirched. He's been revealed as a bit of a monster.
Right.
There you go.
I'm in no.
Right. No, I know.
Mr. Huxtable is not someone I'm going to defend.
No, not at this late date.
But, in Tolkien, we go back to Tolkien, I mean, he wasn't a pop cultural figure.
No.
He was bemused by his strange cultists, and his family is aghast. Or his son Christopher hates the movies.
How old is Christopher now?
Oh, he's
got
to be in his 70s.
He's old, right?
Well into his 70s, I would
think.
And
so they've got. Isn't Michael the next generation of curators?
I think one of Tolkien's grandkids.
Yeah.
Actually has attempted fantasy.
Okay.
I don't know to what
level
of
success,
right.
But you haven't read any Joe Hill, have you? Who's
no.
Stephen
King's son?
Yeah.
Supposed to be great.
Joe Hill is great.
Yeah.
Joe, if I could get you to read a graphic novel, it would be Lock and Key.
Well, I've heard that he's really good.
He's wonderful, and it's
he's
smart and funny and.
Well, and Jacob Dylan is a great singer. Bob Dylan's son.
And what's funny is I've never been able to finish a Stephen King book.
Oh, but you must listen to this. The Stand is really.
Is it terrifying?
No.
Because you have the same taste.
I don't do horror because you know why? Because horror makes me scared.
Which, guess what? Rangers of the Dork Forest.
Yeah.
Will now know that I stole that line from you.
Oh.
There's any number of lines I've stolen from Philcation, ladies and gentlemen.
The only horror movie I've ever seen was Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah.
At the Garden Theater in South Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And I went home and crawled under my covers and wept. Because
for humanity.
Because the baby was the devil's baby.
I saw The Omen, and it was supposed to be a trade. I would watch The Omen if they would watch Pillow Talk. And this was at Zoe Bayless during college in Madison, Wisconsin. And guess who reneged on Pillow Talk? And I said, because I insisted we watch The Omen first.
Right.
So that I could have a palate cleanser of frickin' Pillow Talk before bed. And then nobody would watch Pillow Talk with me. Oh. And I had to watch it myself, which was fine, because I wasn't going to bed.
Right.
After watching The Omen. Anyway. But, so The Stand is not terrifying?
Stand, I think there was one that I read, but the one fantasy series...
Of Stephen King's?
Yeah, the Gunslinger series.
Yeah?
Is outstanding.
Stephen King did a fantasy series called The
Gunslinger.
Okay.
And it's just great. And there's a spoiler in this book that I would never even consider.
So don't tell it to me.
Oh, God, it's just the greatest ending of the series. And it's very dark. It's Stephen King. It's very dark, but it's a very, very good.
Okay.
It's a very good fantasy series. Another really dark fantasy writer that a lot of people like is named Joe Abercrombie.
Yeah.
The Law series, and I frankly won't listen to any more of his. I mean, there's a lot of really gratuitous violence in it.
Right.
And man, they got
to no end.
They got skulls stacked up from here to China, man. They're bad guys, but then are they?
Well, I read 2 Jack Reacher novels because my mother-in-law gave them to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Jack Reacher's on the side of right, but it's the same reason I don't read The Punisher, is vigilantism. I'm more of a rule of law kind of person. And so whenever Jack Reacher comes into town and there's bad guys. Bad guys they're exploiting children or they're raping people, and Jack Reacher, he won't stand for it. I don't know if you know this about him, but he will not stand for it.
You gotta draw a line in the sand.
He does. And he draws it by punching people to death and murdering them, and then they're gone. And there's part of you that's like, yeah, please get rid of those bad guys. Those are the worst guys in the world. And then there's another part of you that's like, well, that's frickin' anarchy, and I can't possibly read 19 books of this.
Well, it's similar, like House of Cards. People ask me if I watch it. I'm like, no, I can just listen to NPR.
Right.
I prefer to rewatch over and over again The West Wing.
Are you? That's Andrew Solomson used to do a very funny joke about The West Wing. He said The West Wing is like porn for people who listen to NPR. That's a funny joke, right?
Yeah, it is funny. He said it's true.
Right. He said, but you know what? You get the government and the girlfriend you deserve. That was his tagline, which is a great line.
I can't even watch The West Wing now because it just reminds me of what we have.
Right. Well, in 2000, I watched The American President, which is also
one of the greatest speeches at the end.
Yep.
Everyone should be a card-carrying member.
Of the ACLU.
Why aren't you a card-carrying member?
Right. And it's essentially The West Wing in an hour-and-a-half movie version.
Have you ever been to Camp David? That's great.
Yeah.
That's a great line.
It's Annette Bening. I wanted to grow up and be Annette Bening, and Michael Douglas is an empty vessel that you could just pour a script into, and the person comes out of it. Because if you think of him in Wall Street, and you think of him in An American President, and then you think about him in Romancing the Stone, those are very different characters. And then he played Henry Pym in Ant-Man.
No, I didn't see that.
Pym? You didn't see Ant-Man?
No.
Ant-Man was great. Ant-Man was great.
It looked dorky.
So, what are you reading right now? You're rereading anything?
I am listening to the 6th book of the Expanse series.
Oh, that TV show that Robert Hurt turned me on to.
Well, James S. Corey
is the author,
who's actually 2 authors.
What?
Two guys.
Yeah?
William Abraham. And actually, the one author is created the world, and the other one does more of the
character stuff, or
more of the hardcore writing.
Huh.
And for the most part, those are really good books, and I like. So I'm listening to that. I haven't finished it. I haven't really gotten into it yet. And I just finished. Well, I listened to I also like. I like rock autobiographies, so I just finished.
Did you read that Keith Richards thing you gave to our brother Scott?
I have listened to Life by Keith Richards.
Okay.
I just finished one by Robbie Robinson, who was with the band.
The band's name is The Band. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a series I like this military sci-fi series called Koban by Stephen Bennett.
How do you spell Koban?
Koban.
Okay.
One of my favorite science fiction writers who, there's another genre there's a popular name called space opera.
Yeah, Lois McMaster Bujold.
Right, that'd be kind of, I think, kind of a weak space opera in my opinion.
Okay.
Peter F. Hamilton is an awesome science fiction writer and really, really good.
Why? What makes space opera if it is not a soap opera in space?
It is a soap opera in space. What I like about what Lois McMaster Bujold's, like Miles Kosigan books, are much more. It seems like they revolve more around Miles's adventures.
What's Peter Hamilton though?
There's a whole plethora of different events happening in different places that.
Right, but did you read Ethos?
No.
The other Bujold books that are set in the Vorkosigan world but aren't Miles Vorkosigan books are great. It's something of Ethos, and they're extraneous. I mean, there's the most tenuous of matchups to the Vorkosigan Barrier world. But that Ethos book, you would like that Ethos book.
I'm going to look at it. The other one I like is Kevin J. Anderson.
Okay.
It's interesting. He is the sci-fi writer that co-writes with Frank Herbert's son.
The Dune guy?
Yeah, the Dune guy. But he also has his own space opera books, the Saga of the Seven Sons. It's really, really good. I like those a lot. And then, I'll delve into some military sci-fi. Jack Campbell, the Lost Fleet series.
Andy just read The Forever War.
Those are great.
Yeah, he had never read Hadelman?
Yeah, no, those are really, really good.
He had never read it before.
Those are really good. And then, when I first started listening to audiobooks, the first fantasy series I listened to was The Wheel Wheezes the Wheel.
That
Robert Jordan.
Robert Jordan, 14 books, the last 3 written.
17 books.
The last 3
written. In fact, what's funny about those books, I actually skipped a book.
Right?
I skipped book 10.
Of 17.
Right, and Robert Jordan was, and may he rest in peace. The guy could not put it down, and he was so descriptive of like the women's clothing and blah 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 blah, and it would go on and on, page after page after page. Mm-hmm. So I skipped book 10, and in real world time between book 9 and book 11, 3 weeks. And the book's probably,
So he was essentially just recording a real existence of another planet.
And Brandon Sanderson finished them with a plume.
Oh, he did nice. Stuck the landing, did he?
Oh, man, they had the Tarmangaden, the battle to end all battles at the end against the Dark One.
Yeah.
See, that was a juxtaposed world of good versus evil, and
Wheel of Time?
With some great characters. Matt Coffin, especially, I liked in those books.
Okay.
I'm loath now to start a fantasy series with 17 books.
Right, exactly. That's why I haven't, because you've always liked them. Like but you remember when Paul was reading the Dragonlance series? Mm-hmm. And I read the first 9 with him, and then the first 6 were written by the same 2 people, and then the next 3 he just kept reading them, and I was like, I'm done reading, because I wanted to read whatever the kids were reading, right?
Right.
Salmon mostly read a lot of for a while anyway. He was reading a lot of the Star Wars books, and I read probably 3 or 4 of them with him. And then Emma was Redwall, but
yeah, we talked about that yesterday. I can't champion a book where the main characters are rodents.
Right. Is it all animals or just rodents? You don't like
in particular rodents, but also it's like there's a lot of sci-fi out there that has.
Did you do Watership Down?
No, never. And there were there were a lot of books where dolphins become sentient.
Oh, the Dolphin Riders of Pern.
That's the one I never read.
That's the
the one author we haven't talked about yet. And
Anne McCaffrey.
What I like about her books, I liked how there were sections where you had characters that you embraced, and there'd be 2 or 3 books where Pimer was preeminent, and and it was been years since I read those.
The Dragon Song, Dragon Drums, Dragon,
right. I love
Dragon
that
Singer.
worldview, and I think she ran out of gas. The last few books where they...
Oh, no, and that felt like publisher coercion at its worst. We've had this conversation before, is when a series goes on so long that some of the characters die of old age.
Right.
Boo! I boo that. And so when the Harper, you're like, I don't want the Harper. And granted, he has to. He's not going to live to be 1,000. He's not Gandalf. And so it's fine. But why don't we just call it, and we don't have to go there?
And what happens to Gandalf at the end?
Gandalf goes off into the West.
He becomes an angel again.
That's it.
What do you think happened to
Frodo?
To Frodo and Bilbo?
I don't know. I think that they just...
I think they died.
I think they sleepily maybe end up in the halls writing poetry, don't you think?
Well, they don't get to go to the mainland. They got to stay at the island.
Oh, they just go to port?
Yeah, the island that's off of the...
That's off of the western
mainland of the west, right. And that's where they go there to die. Well, that's what Corey Olsen thinks.
Oh, is that what... Oh, the Tolkien professor.
Right, but nobody really, nobody knows because Tolkien didn't write a sequel.
Right, and he didn't...
Christopher Tolkien didn't write a sequel. What Christopher Tolkien did took his father's legacy and treated it with the utmost respect and dignity.
Yeah.
And I love Christopher Tolkien for it.
Philcation, it's been exactly 1 hour. That's an excellent way to end it. We have at least 100 hours of other dorkdoms to talk with Philcation about. But let's wrap it up and just say, he's not on Twitter. You're not on Twitter. He's my brother.
I'm not on Twitter.
He's not really. You're on Facebook, but rarely. So it's not like
I'm on LinkedIn.
you guys need printing. You guys, anybody needs to.
You've all
buy
heard
some
of Eliocation? I'm what's called the acorn.
Oh my God! And Rangers, take care of each other out there. You know the rules.
My hat, my hat, my hat. They're dancing around my hat, my hat, my hat, my hat. Well, what do you think of that? If it looks like a Mexican hat dance and it sounds like a Mexican hat dance, it's most likely a Mexican hat dance. So take off your hat and let's dance.
Yay! Oh my God! Why don't we just call that as the end of the show?